Hi, my name is Kelly Hood, and I'm a cybersecurity engineer with Optic Cyber Solutions. I'm also a registered practitioner with the CMMC program. And one of the things I'm hearing the most lately is questions around scoping and what does scoping even mean? So what does this mean? And in its simplest form, it's really to tell the assessor what they're there to evaluate. Now, it is a little bit of an oversimplification because there's a lot of detail that goes into it. But really, we need to think about, how FCI and CUI are handled within our business in order to answer this question. Is your entire company focused on government contracting that it's going to be having contracts with the DoD? Then the entire company may need to be in scope. But if that's limited to a specific business unit or a department or even a server in the corner, you may be able to bring the scope back a little bit and only have part of your organization be certified during the assessment. And limiting the scope of your assessment may make it a little bit easier on your organization. But that's where it really depends on every company. For some, large companies, only a part of your business might be handling FCI and CUI, and so you may not want to build out these CMMC practices across your entire organization. Whereas smaller companies that maybe a subset is still only a subset of the company's business is only handling CUI, but it might be more cumbersome actually to create a distinction and having to have different practices in different places. So that's where we've got to think through a little bit on what kind of data do you have, how is it handled within your business, and what's going to be the simplest way and most effective way for your company to implement the CMMC practices and make sure that this data is protected. So as we think about what we want to include in the certification, we need to think about what needs to be assessed. What kind of data do you have? Do you have FCI? Do you have CUI? Depending on the data that you have, it will drive the type of certification that you need and how much of your organization is in scope. If all you have is FCI, then maybe you just need to reach an ML1 certification, which is about 17 practices. But if you do have CUI data, that will bring in a significant number of practices and mean that we're going to have these capabilities in place up to a level 3 maturity. So we need to think about the type of data that we have. Also, we need to think about where this data is being stored. What environments is it in? What servers is it stored on? Is it also stored on workstations? Do we have users that are accessing this data from different places? So we really need to think about where this data is actually being stored, which also leads into the next question of where it's being processed or transmitted. Are we emailing this data back and forth between workstations? Is it having to run through the network equipment? Do we need to think about sensors that are collecting this information? Or maybe IoT devices that we've got set up that may be processing the CUI or FCI data as well. We need to think about anywhere this data may be being stored or processed, anywhere this data is touching. We also need to think about who's accessing this data. Do all of our employees have access to the data? Do only a subset? How will we need to bring them in and make sure they're trained appropriately? How about our sponsors? Do our government sponsors have access to the data on our site, or are we simply getting it from their environment and pulling it in? Also, we need to think about partners and vendors as well. Partners being somebody we're working with together on a contract that we may be sending information to, such as subcontractors, and then vendors may be companies we are sending CUI data to them as well, but for their service or for the product that they have. So we really need to think about who all has access to the data and in what capacity, because there can be a lot of different options here. All of these questions will help us determine what needs to be in scope, from the locations that it's being stored to where it's being processed to who needs to be trained on the appropriate handling of the data, and ultimately what needs to be done will be determined by the kind of data that you have, whether it's FCI or CUI, and all of the practices that will be brought in at that point. Now, ultimately, all of this data will be captured in your SSP, your System Security Plan, but it's really helpful to start thinking about these questions up front, because that helps with that scoping question. Because as you start getting into the SSP and thinking about access control, well, are we thinking about access control on one server? Are we thinking about access control every point of access across the organization? What do we have to bring in? What can we ignore? And so it really makes it important to think about all of this up front before we jump into the details of where all the protections are in place. And then ultimately that leads us to defining it. Now my tip here is to draw a picture, which sometimes is hard, but usually it is worth the effort. If we can draw a picture of what is and is not in scope, it can make the whole process easier. Like I said, we will be defining it in your SSP. That has to be, you'll have to walk through all the practices and define exactly what is being done. But sometimes starting with that picture just helps everybody know, what fits in this box, what is not in this box, so that we can easily demonstrate what's in the environment that's being certified. And as you do that, you can start to ask some of those questions that we've been talking about does it make more sense to include your whole organization in the assessment or just a subset? Do you already have boundary protections in place in some fashion? Maybe you've got a physical building or office that everybody is required to work out of. I know today we've got more and more people that are working remotely that makes that harder, but that's something we've got to know up front of we can't just think about the physical building protections if everybody's working from their homes. We've got to consider some of the protections around remote workers and having alternate work sites. We can also think about the capabilities that we have in place around logical separations that are created around firewalls or border gateways or things like that. Where can we follow a line that already exists, where we've got separation already in place, that we know that the CUI or FCI is included within. So really, to that second major bullet there, leveraging existing protections and practices where you can. That's going to help you a lot and make the whole process easier. Ultimately, so that we can clearly describe both what we're protecting and how we're protecting it. It is so critical for certification that if an assessor comes in and we can't clearly describe what it is that we're protecting, what is that FCI or CUI data and how we're protecting it, where are those bounds, it's going to make the certification process a lot harder. So that's why my tip here is really a picture is worth 1,000 words. I know it's cliche, but it is so true. So I know this video has included more questions than answers, but really that's where we've got to start. We've got to think about all of those nuances, and the devil is in the details. We've got to think about what data do we have, where is it being processed, where is it being transmitted, who has access to it, and it's going to be different for every organization. But if we can answer those questions and draw a clear picture around it, it will make the whole process much, much simpler. We do have a few resources that we wanted to provide here, some on our website, the Optic Cyber Solutions website. We have a CMMC profile template where we can start capturing some of the capabilities we already have in place. We have a SPURS scoring worksheet as well. And then we also have a bunch of links down here to the CMMC website, from the CMMC AB homepage to the model to the assessment guides, that should help you in your as you look towards certification and thinking about the practices that need to be put in place and what an assessor will be thinking as they are walking through the practices to certify your environment. I will have all of these links in the description down below the video, so please take a look there. I hope you'll find them helpful. Please let us know if you have any other questions. We wanted to provide just a really high-level overview to start thinking about what it means to scope a CMMC certification for your organization and some of those key questions that we're hearing. But please, let us know if there's additional questions or topics you'd like us to cover, specifically around CMMC or cybersecurity in general. We'd really love to hear from you. So I thank you for taking the time to watch the video today. Again, my name is Kelly Hood, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.